Hi everybody, again today. I'm here with a video on my recommended philosophical works for anyone who's just starting out on philosophy. I got the idea from Cinzia Dubois. I'll link her video below. I've watched her for a while, and I really like what she does in her videos. She gets into philosophy, she gets into literature, and she does a lot of self-improvement videos, that kind of thing. But this is one of my favorites of her videos, and I definitely wanted to do something like it myself. So today, I do have 5 philosophy books I think every beginner should read, should get into. And then I have 3 extra that just I happen to read often, that I favor, and some of the ones that I will recommend to beginners are among my favorites too. So let's just get right in. I'm going to start with, I think this is an excellent start, actually. This one is by Bertrand Russell. It's called The Problems of Philosophy. I picked this up about a week and a half ago. It's perfect for a good rundown of the ideas it's a good explanation, a brief explanation of what philosophy does, what philosophy is about. And I'm sure quite a few of you have probably heard of Bertrand Russell. He got very famous at the beginning of the 20th century for making philosophy more accessible to everyone. And, well, this is a very thin book. I mean, you can read this in just a couple of hours. And it's excellent to have for getting into philosophy, because this is the next book I recommend. 10 Great Works of Philosophy. And this one, this is the Signet Classic. This starts getting gritty. This starts getting more complex, going a little bit deeper, and really, you get some of the intimidating terminology. A lot of people are intimidated by philosophy just because of the language of it. Thankfully, only a few of the great philosophers used all of that terminology. I don't really like it myself. I don't think it's all necessary. But nonetheless, this book here is excellent because it starts you off with Plato and ends with William James. So you get a long span of time to get into. You see the development of philosophy over, 1,500 years? And it's very interesting, because then you can start at the beginning with Plato and slowly work your way through, so that the terminology of Kant and Descartes and those kinds of philosophers suddenly becomes automatically a little bit less intimidating and more understandable. So definitely pick this one up. And it has actually, all the works in it are complete. I love that. It's difficult sometimes when books compile just excerpts from multiple different works, because it's difficult to read philosophy in pieces. It really is. You need a complete work to really see how the writer is fleshing out an idea, so that you can fully understand it, and then you can argue with it accordingly. So, there is that one. Next, on that note, The Great Dialogues of Plato. And this is excellent to show now, because I just spoke of argument. That is what philosophy is meant to do. It gets your mind turning, so that everything that these thinkers say becomes a new topic of debate between you and the writer. And that really gets you it makes it to where everything becomes more engaging and more purposeful, because philosophy can certainly be used in our everyday lives. Plato shows you how. He shows you how to use it in the everyday, and he does so in probably the most pleasurable way I have read. He was among, the early ancient philosophers, Socrates, Seneca, Aristotle, who was his student. And he's the most readable because he was the best writer of them all. He knew what he was doing so well that as you're going through all of the many arguments, conversations, that's the format of these, all in just a bunch of conversations, you can't stop reading. It's so much fun. He's wrong a lot. That's some of the point, again, of philosophy. I mentioned this in a previous video. He's wrong a lot. Most of the philosophers are. That's okay. You're not reading to find exact answers. You're not reading to find a deeper understanding of life or of yourself. That's your job to get into. Your job is to understand you and the world around you somehow in the way that you can. But they help you along a little bit. They can help you to argue. They can help you with how to think, how far to go with your thinking. And it's a lot of fun. It's actually a lot of fun. So there's that one. And then we're going to hop back into the 20th century. We started there with Bertrand Russell. We're going to hop right on back in. Here is Jean-Paul Sartre, Nausea. This is a novel, actually. It won the Nobel Prize in 1964 in literature. And it is a very interesting book. It outlines most of the ideas. Actually, no, I shouldn't say it outlines. It really gets into most of the ideas in existentialism. It's an extension, I would say. It reads to me, because I'm speaking literarily, it reads to me like an extension of the high aesthetes in a way. It doesn't really, despite the pessimism of the story, it doesn't really seem to take its own thought too seriously. And it is designed really it's designed to get you going with language. And it's not complicated language at all. Sartre decided to just really, like a lot of the best philosophers, create this as a demonstration of ideas, a way for you to see them actually in action, in use, so that, not to say that you're really going to meet anyone like the protagonist in real life. In certain ways, I should hope not. But it's very interesting because you get to see a lot of existentialism in action. And next, Foucault. This is his The Use of Pleasure, The History of Sexuality, Volume 2. I have not read Volume 1 yet, but this is a pleasure. It is, and that is not, that is no pun or irony. This is a real delight to read. In a lot of ways, yet again, it's not correct. It's not right. But it's so much fun. It really is. He gets into the history of sexuality and culture in a civilization and whatnot, and in a lot of that, he's well researched, and he gets a lot of that pretty on the nose. You're nodding along a lot to a lot of those parts, saying, yeah, that sounds about plausible. But then as he goes further into his theory, then you start wondering, well, maybe, is that entirely correct? Maybe there's something else. And then again, you get to thinking, and you get to complete the theory yourself. You get to bounce off of him to complete your own theory, to develop an opinion of the world around you, from a very pointed, a very specific perspective. So, there is that one. A lot of fun. Now, that is the ones for beginners. I think that gives you a nice, those 5 give you a very nice philosophical package. You get the whole You get all the joys of it and some of the difficulties, but everything is made more accessible just by you getting into all of these. Do I personally recommend you taking one at a time? I don't. I like to read a lot of these all at once because I like to see how they relate to one another, how one comes out of another one. You see the later philosophers, you compare them to the earlier ones, you see how everyone was still expanding upon Plato, still expanding upon Descartes. And it becomes even more interesting, even more, if you keep bouncing around a little bit. And that is why this particular book that I love to read as often as possible looks like this. I can never have enough bookmarks. And yes, this is the European Philosophers from Descartes to Nietzsche, and this contains excerpts from a bunch of their works. And again, it can be a little bit odd to read philosophy in small pieces like this, but the editors who compiled this, they actually did a very good job. So as you're reading through, you get all of what you need probably the most definitive ideas of all of these particular thinkers. You get them. You get to think about them, you get to wonder at them, and you get to, of course, look at several of them with a lot of suspicion. But it's a lot of fun. This is a lot of fun. So I do recommend that you pick this up once you have finally gotten past the basics. You want to go further. You're looking to maybe become immersed in this little literary world. And that is exactly what I think it is. Philosophy was born of poetry, so it is for a certainty a literary realm. And I think it's one that really you can deeply, deeply enjoy. And it does contain, like any other kind of literature, little things that you can use in your daily life, things you can think about every day. And that just makes life a little bit richer, doesn't it? So there's that one. And then I have The Will to Power by Friedrich Nietzsche. This book has been very controversial for a lot of years. I'm sure a lot of you have already heard of Nietzsche, even if you haven't read him. He's kind of the Beethoven of philosophy. Even if you've never read one sentence of his, as a Beethoven, you've never heard one note, you have an idea of who they are. And largely you have the idea, all the ideas that the world does of Nietzsche, for very, well, kind of sinister reasons. He was favorite reading in the early 20th century of the Nazi Party, that kind of thing. You know, it was in direct association with a lot of the worst people on the planet, but still, you know, it's shaped his reputation a little bit. I think that is very unfair, because Nietzsche, in this book, as in any one of his works, he's not really meant to be taken entirely as law in any way. No philosophical work is, but I think Nietzsche is one of those who especially should not be taken just as law, because even in his finished works, another reason that this book is controversial is that many scholars believe it's useless for its not being final. It is actually compiled from his notebooks, so it contains a lot of the germs of his major philosophical works, his major philosophical poetical work. Thus spoke Zarathustra. It doesn't really give you the complete picture of all of his thought. So many scholars have considered it worthless, while others are saying no, it's still Nietzsche. It's still a major work, and it's very powerful, which it is. And it is I believe it's very useful because it isn't final. So every one of the ideas that you read in here that he may or may not have believed later, that he may have changed. Still, you get to read it. You get to think about it. And you get to decide for yourself. You get to decide for yourself if anything he has to say is worth your time, which I believe it absolutely is. Because again, he isn't final in anything. He really never was. So you get to play as much as he did with his own ideas. And it makes it's definitely worthwhile. Definitely worthwhile reading. The Will to Power itself, the title comes from a major theory of his. He believed that pretty much everybody operates on the will to power. It's a weird theory, I will say. He doesn't give you a lot of clarity on exactly what, on a point-by-point basis, what he really means. But basically everybody is trying to, in some way or another, gain control over their lives, gain control over an aspect of their lives. Maybe they're an artist and they're trying to better their craft. He has a whole section in here on that. And it, you get ideas of what he's talking about and all of that, and it's very good. I'm loving it. I haven't finished it yet. I'm loving this book. So do pick that up. Again, after you have gone through the beginnings and whatnot, pick this up. And then finally, I'd like to show you guys the work that got me into philosophy in the first place. It's an unlikely one, according to a lot of the things I read anyway. Very few people get into philosophy because of this particular work, because it is not a formal work of philosophy. It's intended as a literary piece, but also a theoretical piece. But that was the way, of course, of Edgar Allan Poe. He loved to play around with just about everything. He indulged himself in every possible way. Hence many writers' and scholars' criticism of his work, but it's still so much fun, no matter what. Edgar Allan Poe is so much fun, and that is definitely also the case in this work, entitled Eureka. In this book, here's what the opening page looks like. And you see right there, even he calls it a prose poem. Because again, philosophy was born of poetry, and Poe definitely, he shows you how. And Albert Einstein commented on Eureka. He said that it describes much of the foundation of physics, of the cosmological realm, but really it's not to be taken seriously. Well, again, that's kind of the point of most philosophy. It's never to be taken as final. But in Poe's case, he really does play around a lot. He shows you what you can do with all kinds of different ideas in philosophy. And he uses multiple different types of thinking. He uses scientific thinking. He uses metaphysical thought. He uses moral philosophy. He throws a lot into this. So it's a good way, if you're already accustomed to his more analytical language, such as that in The Mystery of Marie Roget, or The Golden Bug, or even, I would contend, The Murders in the Rue Morgue, then you'll have no problem really reading it. But there's a lot of joy in there. And I immediately wanted to read more philosophy after I finished this particular essay. So it's a lot of fun. I recommend it. And that is it for now. If any of you have read any philosophy that you've enjoyed, I'd love to see it. I'm always interested also in... I always try to find new thinkers. It's very difficult, I suppose, because so many of them are they're definitely into more of the technical side of everything. Their language can get very mathematical and whatnot, so they can be a little bit more tedious to read. Again, it's not because really it's difficult to understand. It's not really that difficult, but it seems so unnecessary that sometimes it can be frustrating, to say the least. So I'm always on the lookout. If any of you have any suggestions, I would love to hear them. And I hope that this is helpful to anyone who is trying to get into it, or thinking about going even further if they already have the basics down. So again, thank you guys so much for the conversation so far. I look forward to this new part of it. I'll see you all tomorrow.